Hi once again, this is Kivy Crash Course number 12. I said at the end of the last video that I'd probably look at Kivy's settings panel next, but actually I changed my mind when I remembered I haven't covered anything about Android since my second video. Of course, everything I've done since then will work fine on Android following the normal build procedures that I talked about, but none of it uses any features outside of Kivy and Python's standard library. The big question is, how do we access hardware features like the accelerometer, vibration or GPS? Or even just normal Android APIs like those to send a text message or email, or to create a notification. Kivy and its associated project actually have some extremely powerful tools allowing extensive access to Android's APIs straight from Python. I'm going to talk a bit about them in this video, and I'll demonstrate some basic usage. So, I've pre-built this extremely simple program, so in principle you can test these things yourself. All it does is import some modules, and run a basic application that doesn't even return a widget. I've also pre-made a buildozer.spec file, as I explained in my second Crash Course video. It does nothing special, so you can just check Buildozer's documentation or that video, or in fact I also did a big text write-up of the Buildozer process, which I've linked, if you prefer to go through it that way. I've also put links to both of these files for you if you want to download and try the code from this video. It should just run easily straight on Android. So let's actually get going. Now there are actually three different things I'm going to show you. Just to say in advance, they are the Android Python module, the pyjnius tool for accessing Java classes from Python, and Kivy's newer plyer module. I'll say now that the last of these, plyer, is what you should look at first. It's the newest project and it makes use of the others, but it's quickly growing and will soon become the easiest way to access native APIs not just on Android, but on iOS and desktop platforms as well. We'll see why in a few minutes. But first of all, I'm going to cover the Android module. This is a Python module that you can compile into your Kivy distribution with Buildozer, and it gives a little limited API access. Just to show you the basic syntax, here's how we do vibration. We do import Android, and then simply android.vibrate 10 for 10 seconds. Note that I still haven't returned a root widget, but the program would still run. It would start the vibrator going, even though it immediately closes. We'd also have to tell Buildozer to compile the Android module into our Python distribution by changing the requirements line, requirements equals Android and Kivy. And because we're using vibration, we mustn't forget to change the permissions of our APK. It's going to need the vibrate permission. If you don't do this, it won't have the right permissions to call the vibrate API and will just crash when you try to do so. So don't forget. That's it though, that's a basic usage of the Android module. And it's fine, but actually the problem is it doesn't support that much of Android's API. You can do a few basic things like vibration, or opening the keyboard or closing the keyboard and things like that. But you quickly hit limits if you want to call things that simply haven't been implemented yet. I wanted to show it to you in case you needed to use it, but I stressed the other things I'm about to show you generally are or will soon be a much better way to do the same tasks. That's because we're going to use the pyjnius module, a fantastic Python library and a Kivy sister project for accessing Java classes straight from Python. It will let us automatically create a Python front end to the Java class and call its methods exactly as normal Python methods, including automatically translating our Python arguments into Java objects. Even though Android's native API is all in Java, that means we can access it straight from Python without needing to write any Java code. That's actually in contrast to the Android module I showed you first. One reason I don't recommend it is that behind the scenes it uses manually written Java classes and Python, so it's hard to extend compared to just calling the Java API this way. So how do we use pyjnius? I give you a very basic example here, just to give you a flavour of what it involves. If you're interested, you can check the documentation for more information and tricks, but we'll see in a moment how Kivy's plyer module has already done this for many common APIs. So you generally won't have to do any of this kind of slightly verbose way of doing things for normal APIs like GPS, accelerometer and so on. But anyway, since I showed you vibration, let's show this pyjnius way of doing things totally from scratch. Do from genius, import auto class. Auto class is the function that takes a Java class and produces a Python class with the same methods that lets us call that class from Python. We can then use it. We can do Python activity is auto class. Let's just make sure I write it down correctly. Yes, org.renpy.android.python activity. This isn't a normal Android API class, but it's actually the activity, the Android activity, used by our Kivy application running as an Android APK. The reason we need it is that it stores a reference to the currently running activity. Activity equals python activity.m activity. And you often need this activity if you're going to call a Python API. They often need references to the currently running activity. Don't worry about it if this doesn't mean anything to you. I'm only covering it because I quickly want to show an example of using vibration. And you don't need to know any of this for plyer, which I'll show you in a moment. But anyway, quickly showing vibration. Now we can do context equals autoclass android.content.context. This is a normal Android API class for the context of an application. And now we can do vibrator. To access the normal vibrator service is activity.getSystemService context.vibrator service. If you have used the Android API at all before with a Java application, you'll notice that this is literally exactly what you would do in Android with normal Java. It's the same methods, the same Java class names, and exactly the same attributes used to access them. We're just doing it straight from Python, and pyjnius is taking care of translating that to Java for us. With that done, we can now simply do vibrator.vibrate. That's the normal Android method you would use. And we can do 10,000. It takes a number of milliseconds, so 10,000 in 10 seconds. And that's exactly the same effect we had from the original Python module. But now we're really calling the Android API directly from Python without pre-writing anything. Everything is handled by pyjnius dynamically. This is... Obviously it's a bit more verbose than the pre-wrapped vibrate method I showed you first, but that's actually only because it is exactly duplicating the Java code you'd write to do this. Again, as well, it's a very simple example, and pyjnius can access a very large part of the Android API this way, and it can also do other things like implementing Java interfaces directly in Python. I won't go into that here, and in general you don't need to know or care about it, but be aware that there really is amazing flexibility here for calling Java from Python. Nevertheless, that was a bit verbose, and we prefer an interface that uses pyjnius behind the scenes, but exposes a Pythonic API like the Android module I mentioned first. For this reason, Kivy's developers also created the Plyer project, which actually exposes a platform-independent API so you can write code once and have Plyer automatically run it in the right way on any supported platform. That's not just Android, but also iOS and the desktop. In fact, on iOS, Kivy created a similar tool similar to pyjnius, but for Objective-C, which of course iOS applications are written in. Plyer is the newest project of all those I've mentioned, but it is quickly growing to support more APIs, and it's probably the first place you should look if you want to use any of these features. To get it, you can download it straight from the GitHub repository where it's stored at the moment. I'll put a link to that in the description. Or on Android, we can simply tell builders to use it again, so we find requirements, get rid of Android. Builders now knows how to install Plyer, so we simply write it in the requirements line. So if you use it in an Android application, that's all you have to do to reference it. We can now get rid of all this pyjnius stuff. And the syntax is now, assuming you have Plyer installed, from Plyer, let's use notification import. Plyer.notification import notify. I use notify because that's one of the APIs that's already supported on every platform, so it will work. So your program will work regardless of whether you try it on Windows, Linux, OS X, iOS, or Android. And then the syntax really is simple and Pythonic. You do notify some title and some message text. So if you run that on Android, it will pop up a normal Android notification in your notification bar. If you run it on a desktop, it will use whatever notification library is appropriate to your operating system. But always you call it in the same way, simply by running notify, and you don't have to care about any of that behind the scenes stuff. That's why Plyer is useful. It's both extensible and Pythonic. So, that's a very quick walk through these three basic ways of doing things. I'll stress that really Plyer is the first place you should look. I only showed you the others because it's useful if you do need to know them, to have a quick introduction. But Plyer will support most APIs on most platforms in a way that the other two do not, alone. That's all I think for now though. You can experiment and look at the documentation to see other things you could call. And you can run the code from this tutorial by simply downloading what I've written and using this builder.spec file. It should all work fine. For the next video, I probably will come back and do the settings panel that I mentioned last time, unless someone suggests a better idea in the description. And do feel free to do so, I'm happy to take suggestions. For now though, thank you for watching.